Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, for more than 15 years, you've been advocating for safer consumer goods. What started you off on this journey?
I actually didn't want to dive into consumer safety. It was something that I was resistant to. And lo and behold, here I am. I'm kind of at the forefront of this fight. But I actually started my career right out of college working on traditional environmental issues. So, specifically, working to address climate change, transition Minnesota, where I'm from, that economy away from coal. And I really wanted to keep working on climate. But as it is those first few years out of college, when you don't have a lot of experience, but you think you have a lot of experience, I kept applying for these jobs that I wasn't qualified for. But there was an entry level position for me to start working on environmental health. And environmental health is specifically the study of toxic chemicals in our environment, whether that's our drinking water, the air we breathe, or the products in our homes. And I was like, consumer safety, that's like not cool. That's not sexy enough. Climate change is sexy. But I needed a job, like most people do when they're young. And I took the job, and I was kind of a naysayer. I was interviewed and talking to a woman at an organization, and she was telling me about how toxic chemicals can enter our body. And I was just like, it was not landing with me. But what did land is when I went home and I hopped on the internet and I started to research the body of science around environmental health. And I accepted the job, and the rest is kind of history. I fell in love with the idea that at my core, I am an environmentalist unapologetically, and I care about protecting the natural world. And it was a hard realization for me that not everyone necessarily cared to the same degree that I did. But when you started talking to them about products in their home that they use on and in around their bodies and their children's bodies, suddenly it opened up a door to talk about the environment in a very different way. And so it was a blessing in disguise, even though I wanted these other jobs that were working on cooler issues. Little did I know that clean living, which wasn't even a term back then, would eventually become the cool thing that everyone was talking about. But I found it to be a very powerful transition for me to get into this space, which is based on a field of environmental health science, but really you talk about it when it comes to consumer safety.
Mm, that's so powerful. I think one of the things I love that you said is about the transition to talking to people about the environment that's closest to them. So, what they're putting on their bodies and their kids' bodies, and that as a doorway into a bigger conversation of what's safe and what's not, and what's healthy and what's not.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that market research confirms is that consumers, especially women who are pregnant, are drastically changing how they purchase goods for their home and their bodies. And it's because it's for the first time they're actually thinking of their body as an environment for something else. And there's a lot of power in that, whether someone's pregnant or not. People do in their home environments or just thinking about their own health. It's an interesting way that we've evolved in the last 10 to 15 years in a very short period of time, where people are suddenly being able to translate. Oh, I remember learning in history class about how rivers were burning and you couldn't see a half a mile in Los Angeles because the smog was so bad. That happened a while ago. We fixed that problem, right? To suddenly realizing, oh, wait, maybe there are things we still need to be addressing when it comes to protecting people's health and our environment. And the two are really inextricably linked, but how people enter the conversation is different. And it was a good learning for me, as people do when they're young, like, why doesn't everyone see the world the way that I do? But it was helpful for me to say, you know what, there are a lot of people care about this issue. It's just how you open the conversation. It depends on how receptive they'll be to hearing the message you have to share.
Absolutely. Now, you're currently Beautycounter's SVP of Mission. How did you end up there?
A long and interesting road. So I spent the first part of my career in the public sector working in the nonprofit space. So I am from Minnesota originally, and that's where I first kind of cut my teeth in the public policy world, where I was working for environmental nonprofits and public health nonprofits to pass pieces of legislation at the state level. And in Minnesota, I had some early wins that I was a part of, and that kind of energized me. I always hated politics, but those early wins in my early 20s taught me that, I could tell all of my friends which products to buy or to change out their light bulbs and the impact that could have on our climate, or we could pass laws that actually really fix the problem. And so it was a pretty light bulb moment for me to say, I don't like politics, but actually, if you can navigate it, you can win for public health and the environment. And in 2009, I helped pass the first law banning bisphenol A, BPA, from baby bottles and sippy cups. And
Wow.
that there was a bunch of pieces of legislation that we passed in those several years. But I got a phone call from my former mentor and boss, Andy, and he said, Lindsay, I want to do what you're doing in the state of Minnesota. We need to do this in DC. So a bunch of states were passing laws to create pressure on the federal government to really overhaul our federal laws on toxic chemicals. And I joined him there and lived and worked in DC for a little over 5 years, working to pass federal laws restricting toxic chemicals from our environment and our products. And I got a phone call right when I was getting kind of burnt out on DC. I got a phone call and decided to join the Beautycounter team. And the rest is kind of history. So I've been here for 7.5 years. I now oversee our mission team, which we can talk about if you want to kind of talk about day-to-day life here. But we're now using this platform, which is a business instead of a nonprofit, to push our elected officials to understand why it's important for us to have legislation that's going to make sure that all beauty products are safe, regardless of who you are or how much income you may have.
What an incredible journey. And to have been part of literally changing laws within the US to keep consumers safer. That's so amazing. Now, for the listeners who aren't familiar with Beautycounter, can you briefly explain what the company does?
Yeah, so we're a company that's based in Southern California. We manufacture and develop skincare products and cosmetics for the whole family. So we do a range of your traditional skincare, and shampoo type products for your body. And then we also create makeup and sunscreen. And we have a men's line. And our whole thing at Beautycounter and our mission is to get safer products into the hands of everyone. And for us, that doesn't just mean Beautycounter's products. So yes, we do work really, really hard to create the cleanest formulas and bring products to the market that people can use today. But we also use our business to educate people, to help decipher what does the science say and how can they become savvy consumers, whether that's about responsible sourcing or how to find clean products. It's wildly complicated. I'm an expert. I work in this field. I have been in this field for a long time, and it's confusing to me. It's certainly confusing for the average consumer who doesn't spend that much time shopping, nor should they have to. And finally, we use our business platform to pass laws that are going to make clean beauty products a reality for everyone. We know that being first to market and being the brand that really mainstreamed what is now thought of as clean beauty today, we know that our price point is not accessible to everyone. And so baked into the DNA of the company, and to our CEO's credit, is something that she knew from the time she launched the company. She always said it wasn't enough just to make products, because no single brand can reach every consumer. But we also need to use our business voice to pass laws that are going to protect people. And, businesses every single day are weighing in on legislation. It's usually behind the scenes, and it's usually to protect the status quo. And what we're doing differently is we're being vocal about it. We are mobilizing other businesses to join us, including individuals. And we're asking Congress to regulate us. We're asking Congress to regulate our industry, which is typically not a message that elected officials are used to hearing.
I love that. And I think the way that Beautycounter goes about trying to be at the forefront of change and have the cleanest beauty products on market, but then also create a ripple effect within the industry through showing what can be done, create a new status quo, and also through regulation is really a great example of having or exemplifying true leadership within an industry, and creating lasting change. So bravo to you.
Thank you. You know, the thing I think, so our CEO, her name's Greg Renfrew. The one thing she says a lot, which it relates to this concept of we come to this from a non-competitive standpoint. And the reason being is that we think there's enough space for all brands to play, and it should become where the future of beauty, all beauty is clean beauty. Like that is the aspiration. And I think it takes someone like her who doesn't come from beauty to be able to say, I'm not beholden to this industry, so let's change it all, even if that means I'm not going to be as competitive about my share in the market. But, you know, she really had this vision to be able to say, look, if you think about organic food, Whole Foods put organic food kind of on the map or mind of today's consumer. But right now, Costco sells more organic foods by volume than Whole Foods does. And we think of Beautycounter in the same kind of vein. There may be another brand that is 3 times as large as we are 5 to 10 years down the road. And they may be making clean beauty products, but we want to be known as a brand who really fundamentally transformed the conversation about what it means to have clean products for your family, and to show people that you don't have to compromise a product's performance for the safety of the ingredients that are in them.
That's so important. And I love that analogy. Now, in a recent interview with Beauty Independent, you addressed criticism coming from various corners of the beauty world about the term clean beauty, which you just referenced. Could you share the difference between what clean beauty is and natural beauty, and why Beautycounter takes a position it holds?
Yeah, so right now there is criticism. People are saying clean beauty is not defined. It's just a new marketing term. And just to level set, the entire beauty industry is built on undefined and unregulated marketing terms, including green beauty, natural beauty, FDA approved, dermatologist tested, like all these things, hypoallergenic, made for sensitive skin. The beauty industry is using terms that indicate something to a consumer without backing it up. So the difference between clean beauty and natural beauty is natural beauty signals to a consumer that the only ingredients in that product are naturally derived. Clean beauty is a different way to look at formulating, which is to say, regardless if something is a natural ingredient or it has origins in a lab, so it's synthetic, is that ingredient safe, regardless of its source? And Beautycounter has always used science as our guiding light to use and inform our formulations. And so we always felt when we launched, natural beauty wasn't true to who we were, because we know that when you use some synthetic colorants in makeup forever, you actually have less heavy metals than if you use a natural colorant. We also know that some of the safest preservatives on the market are synthetic, they are not natural. And so for us, we didn't want to use the term green because it didn't feel like it fully encompassed who we are. So clean beauty is the thing that's, I think, most accurately describes what we're doing. That's kind of secondary. The first thing that's most important is that we actually define what clean means to us in detail on our website, because we think as a transparent company, it's important to share with consumers what these definitions mean to us, absent any sort of federal definition, and then they can decide whether or not we're the brand for them. And so we have what's called our blueprint for clean. It has 12 different pillars that are comprehensive and span from responsible sourcing to sustainable packaging to our heavy metals testing program. And we really spell that out in detail for consumers because we want them to know our definition of clean, and hopefully they'll see the thought and diligence behind our products before they go to actually add something to the cart and have it shipped to their home.
I love that. And transparency is so important, especially as you're talking about all of these terms within the beauty industry that are used frequently, but there isn't a defined definition of what they actually mean. And what makes you be able to put that on your label versus not be able to put that on your label. So going the step forward and saying, we're going to define this for what it means for us, and we're going to show transparently what that is a really great, again, leadership move of taking a stand within the industry.
Yeah, and we're taking it a step further too. We're not only just doing it on the market side of thing, we're also working with our elected officials to pass laws that help define these terms. So we've formally endorsed the Natural Cosmetics Act, which would for the first time define what natural means in the beauty industry. And again, I think taking it that additional step is something that shows that this isn't lip service. This is something we actually care about. We do want a shared definition that we can all play by the same rules, because right now it's just really up to whoever can position themselves in a way that feels flashiest to the consumer, knowing that most consumers make purchasing decisions within a matter of seconds.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Now, here I want to talk a little bit about purpose and profit. So, Beautycounter has been really successful. This past spring, the Carlyle Group purchased a majority stake, and the valuation was estimated to be $1 billion. And Beautycounter's purpose, as you mentioned earlier, is to get safer products into the hands of everyone. And at the core of the company is the mission of public policy advocacy. I'm curious how difficult it is to balance both purpose and financial aspirations, or do you find this advocacy work and the company's purpose helps the company be more successful financially by creating more loyal consumers?
Both. What you're asking is kind of the $1 million question, or $1 billion question, as it may be. You know, when we make decisions every single day of how we're going to screen ingredients, what kind of testing we're going to undergo, and what packaging we're going to choose for the consumer, there's a cost to all of that. It is more expensive right now to create clean products that are in sustainable packaging. So we have to make trade-offs all the time, which are very challenging, because we can't, or we don't, we've chosen not to have a luxury price point. We're right about department store pricing right now. And so there's always the kind of tragedy of choice of what we want to do and what we actually do. When it comes to something like advocacy, it costs money to fund a program where you have full-time staff who are lobbying elected officials, that most companies, instead of putting that expenditure in, they just pay a fee to a trade association, which does that lobbying for them. To the second part of your question, we have found, although it's hard to measure, which we're okay with it not being measurable, which a lot of businesses want everything to be measured, but we know that people love our brand, they are more loyal to our brand, and continue to shop with us because of our work in Washington, D.C. And again, we're not coming at this from some marketing, like it's not a marketing stunt. It's part of the reason our CEO hired people like me who have real experience in Washington and know how it works, to say, we need to actually fundamentally fix our laws. Corporate activism is something that's cool now. It was not cool when Beautycounter first started doing this work. We had to kind of show to people, and we had to show to consumers there's a way to do nonpartisan advocacy in a hyper-partisan world and mobilize people around a shared value. And in this instance, it's the value of protecting our families and protecting our health. And having people who usually just have a transactional interaction with a brand to also be asked to email their members of Congress, it creates a different type of relationship. And it has been the key to our success in passing 10 laws in the last 7 years. So you can lobby all you want. If you don't have people, real people, constituents calling and emailing their elected officials, which is the power of the grassroots part of our brand, you can't get anything passed. And so that mobilization has been a recipe to our success, but it also has had this impact on the brand that we hadn't quite anticipated. We didn't start this advocacy program to increase consumer loyalty. It's a natural byproduct of doing the work with authenticity.
And I think that's a really important point, and one that I want to call out and focus on for a minute. Because in years past, CSR efforts from companies oftentimes were seen as a cost line item on a balance sheet. And that was it. It was something you did when you had surplus revenues, but it wasn't necessarily consistent and it wasn't necessarily integrated into the business and what the business does. And the way Beautycounter is structured, your purpose and the advocacy work is very much integrated into the business. It's authentically part of what you do and why you exist. And it's a new way of approaching being a company in any industry. And I think Beautycounter is such a great example that purpose and profit don't need to contradict each other. They can go hand in hand and they can actually make you a stronger business because of it. Because suddenly your employees, you're attracting great employees that are aligned with the values you have as a company and they want to be part of creating that change that you're creating. And you attract consumers that are also aligned with those values and will want to be part of something bigger and want to have more than just a transactional relationship. So I think that's a really important point.
You're exactly right. The world didn't need another beauty brand. And, there are so many beauty brands. There are so many places you can go to get a mascara. What the world needed was a company that was going to try to create the best mascara possible that works, stays on your eyelashes, doesn't fall off and smudge, but uses clean ingredients and is packaged sustainably. And the reason we're successful is because of this work, not in spite of it. And that's why it's actually challenging for a position like mine in a business environment. I want to be able to show how beneficial or valuable our dedication to clean, responsible sourcing, sustainability has been to the consumer. But the reason I've not been effectively been able to measure it is because it's so enmeshed in everything we do. Mm. But we do see other larger indicators of success, including the Carlisle acquisition, that shows that this is where the market's going. It is not a niche flash in the pan type of beauty trend. This is the future of beauty. And that is why they believed in us and wanted to invest in our company. And it's also why consumers are responding and our business continues to grow.
Yeah. And I think another piece that is really important, since Beautycounter is a first mover in this space, was just creating awareness for consumers that, oh, wow, should I actually look at what I'm putting on my body? Is that as important as what I'm putting into my body? And really starting to understand the impact of the products we use on our body to our health, which I know for myself was a very new learning, a new piece of information that I'd never considered before and never knew could be damaging.
Yeah, that's exactly right. People have spent a lot of time transitioning how they eat, and the products that you put on your body for a lot of people are kind of the final frontier to realize, oh, I may have been using 7th generation to clean my home for a decade, but I hadn't really thought about anything after I went to my workout class, but I was covering myself head to toe in a moisturizer that had questionable ingredients in it. And I do think it's the conversation now is so different than it was years ago. To your point, being the first to market, we had to explain a lot in those first 5 to 7 years. We now have to explain less because the baseline understanding for consumers is so much more sophisticated than it used to be. And it's helpful because now it actually allows us to pivot away from telling what feels like a negative story, which is, here's why we don't use these ingredients. Here's the harm caused by these ingredients that are commonly found in the beauty industry, and actually transition to say, here's why we chose these ingredients for their safety. Here's why we chose to work with a responsibly sourced vanilla for this lip gloss. It allows us the space to tell the positive story, because as I always say, banning ingredients is the easy part. It's what really matters for consumers is how you define the safety of what's going into the product that they actually put on their bodies every single day.
Absolutely. Now I want to circle to the top priorities of Beautycounter is listed on your website. So number 1 is unparalleled safety screening program. Number 2, a commitment to sustainability, especially through packaging. And number 3, responsible sourcing. making sure that people along your supply chain are safe, not just the end consumer who's using the product. And Beautycounter has set ambitious moonshots aligned with these priorities, including by 2025, 100% of packaging being recycled, recyclable, refillable, reused, or compostable, which is amazing. And by 2030, Beautycounter will achieve carbon neutrality. Now, focusing just on the first priority of unparalleled safety screening, can you please share more about that? I know you touched on Blueprint for Clean earlier. Could you also share what the Never List is?
Happy to. So the Never List is a list of over 1,800 ingredients that we prohibit from our formulations. And so this includes classes of chemicals like forever chemicals, PFAS, which are widely talked about in the news right now and have recently been found in long wear makeup that have a lot of questionable health impacts. Something like phthalates, a class of chemicals that are commonly used in the fragrances used in personal care products. So the Never List are ingredients that we know they've either been restricted by authoritative other bodies like the European Union or Canada, or there's a body of science behind them that says, you know what, it's probably best for us to make a product without that hormone disrupting chemical. And so that's the origins of the Never List. And it's important because, like I was just saying earlier, it's important to ban and restrict chemicals that are commonly used in the beauty industry. That's really the easiest part. We can kind of get into the details of ensuring that those chemicals through all these other different supply chain kind of points don't enter into your product. That's probably too detailed for right now. But the thing that's interesting is after we look at the Never List, when we're screening a formula, what's most important for consumers is how we define safety. And so we screen every single ingredient against 23 health and environmental endpoints before it gets into our product. And we do that using the best peer-reviewed science and also by considering vulnerable populations. And so traditionally, if you're a scientist and you're deciding what's safe, you're looking at a white 30-year-old male as your kind of case or test subject. Not actually testing on it, but that's how the scientific models are built. But that doesn't incorporate real life exposures. It doesn't include vulnerable communities like women of color, communities of color, pregnant women, children. And so we consider those populations when we decide and define what safe is for Beautycounter, because we know if we're looking to protect the most vulnerable communities, we're going to be creating the safest products possible. Now, the screening is really looking at the best literature, but then we go on to do testing that's really unheard of in the industry, even in the clean beauty industry, including testing every batch of every color cosmetic before it goes to market for a suite of heavy metals. We do a bunch of contaminant testing, including for things like forever chemicals, PFAS, and for things like phthalates, which can contaminate products from the manufacturing equipment. So we try to do the homework that people really don't want to think about. They want to know that someone's doing that hard homework, so they can really build trust in our company and really just have fun when they're buying beauty products rather than having to worry.
That's incredible. And that's the way that buying products should be. You shouldn't need to be worrying about whether or not it's going to be harmful for you. If it's made it on a shelf, you should hope that it is safe. And it's unfortunate that we aren't at that place yet across industries. Now, you touched a little bit earlier on packaging. Can you speak a bit more about how Beautycounter is trying to tackle package waste and incorporate sustainable packaging into the line?
Packaging in the beauty industry is one of our biggest challenges, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The packaging industry has not innovated, even though consumers have been asking for more sustainable packaging. So there's limited tools in our toolbox. But the other reason it's really challenging is because products that are less than 3 inches by 3 inches are not caught by our municipal waste system and are not properly recycled. So what that means is small format, including the majority of cosmetics, go straight to the landfill, regardless of what the material is. And so for us, it really begs the question, how are we going to design our products in a way that think about the environment and the overall life cycle of the product? We had to spend all of this time focusing on getting the formulations themselves clean, that we didn't have the luxury to think about packaging in the beginning. Now, as we talked about, the conversation is so much more advanced now. We have the time and ability to address, which is something we've always cared about from the beginning, which is sustainable packaging. So we really tackle it in 3 different ways. Number one, we're trying to design for circularity as much as possible. So a great example of that would be our clean deodorant or our cream blush. They are refillable. And so you drastically reduce your impact on the environment if you're just buying that component once and you're getting small refills. The second is we're trying to transition to environmentally preferred materials. So that includes post-consumer recycled plastic, glass, aluminum, different materials that have a lower footprint than something like virgin plastic. And we're also trying to reduce our impact by making smart decisions. The majority of the beauty industry sources their packaging from Asia, which has a very high carbon footprint. We're trying to source as much of our packaging as we can from North America, knowing that that's an important part of the puzzle that consumers often don't see when they're using and trying to decide what's sustainable or what's not.
That's incredible. And yeah, just building off of that, when thinking about where your product is being made versus where it's being purchased, you have that whole carbon footprint to get from point A to point B. So it's really great that you're looking at sourcing in a more local area. Now, another thing that is, I guess, the number 3 of the priorities for Beautycounter is around responsible sourcing and establishing an ethical supply chain that ensures that people along your supply chain are safe as well as the end consumers. Can you share a bit more about what you're doing in that space?
I see this as the next big question that consumers are going to be asking as we start to have more intimate relationships with brands. So for us at Beautycounter, we focus so much on safety. Is this product safe for the person using it? And if we care that much about safety, we should also care about the safety of the people bringing us products, whether that's a mined ingredient like mica, or it's a harvested and grown ingredient like palm or vanilla. We know that we have limited ingredients that we can use to formulate our products because we've restricted so many of them. So a great example, something like a mica, is used, whether you're a clean beauty brand or a conventional beauty brand, it's used across virtually all cosmetics, both as the base of the formula. It also is used as a shimmer effect. And mica is incredibly safe, but it's not safe for people that are mining it. So we have known, and there's been a large news cycle around child labor in the mica industry. And we as a company had all these certificates on file, rubber stamping saying, this mica that you're sourcing is free of child labor. We wanted to ask the question, do those pieces of paper mean anything? And the second we started to do detailed phone audits with our mica suppliers, it became quickly clear that all it was a rubber stamp to make companies feel okay. They actually didn't know where their mica was sourced, or they didn't want to be transparent. And if you can't get to a visible supply chain, that's when you know human rights abuses like child labor can exist. And so perhaps naively or boldly, however you want to describe it, Beautycounter said, you know what, we're a small portion of the market, and beauty itself only sources about 10 to 15% of the world's mica. But people have known child labor as an issue, especially in India, in the mica industry for a long time, and no one's done anything about it. So we got really loud and we told the story publicly and are helping transition. We dropped a bunch of suppliers that weren't transparent with us. We formulated away from them. And we worked with the existing suppliers who needed to make improvements around human rights issues and worker safety in their supply chain. And they're rolling up their sleeves and they're doing the hard work, as you would hope they would. And so we're in our some small way trying to raise a bunch of noise, get other beauty brands to do what we're doing. We're sharing a toolkit transparently on our website of how we're doing this work so others can do it as well. And the hope is that collectively enough companies, beauty or otherwise, are asking hard questions of their MICA supply chain to help create a traceable supply chain. So this work is important because it connects us to people, communities, and hands harvesting, growing, and mining the ingredients that create a skin cream or a bronzer that you put on in the morning. And that type of connection, I think, is something that consumers are not only craving, but it's obviously the right thing to do. And companies are not currently held accountable outside of the court of public opinion for their supply chains. And we think that's wrong. We know why it's really hard because we're in this work and we always say it's messy and we don't have all the answers. But I think it's been a really powerful thing for our brand to take what is traditionally done behind the scenes, supply chain risk reduction work, and make it very public.
I love that. And what I love about it is taking accountability for stuff that happens even before the products come into your products, before the ingredients come into your products, and saying there's something wrong with this process. We're going to figure out how to help create a solution and then share that information with others to hope to start a movement that changes the entire supply chain. I recently talked to Tony's Chocolonely, a chocolate company that doing the same thing within the chocolate industry and with cocoa, which has child slave labor, very well known within that supply chain. And so doing the same thing of how do we fix this? How do we get transparency? And how do we show how to create an ethical supply chain that other companies can follow? And that's the way massive change is able to be made. So I very much applaud you on doing that within your supply chain as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's been, people, as you would expect, it's so hard to formulate clean. It's so hard to tackle packaging. And there was a little, not headwinds internally, but people were like, oh, another restriction, like another thing we have to do as a brand. And I think the trifecta of clean ingredients, sustainable packaging, and responsible sourcing is truly unique. And we hope that it's no longer unique. Like we hope that this is just the standard way of doing business. And the more people that do it, the easier it's going to become, because we have found on basically all three of those fronts, you can't be the only voice. You need the market demanding that. And the way you get the market to demand it is by mobilizing people, which is why education is such a core part of our brand. So I'm personally passionate about responsibly sourced ingredients. I know the team is here as well. And we're earlier in the conversation, but we're starting to see how the marketplace is asking harder questions. And to your chocolate example, like many things, so much of this starts in the food industry and then is translating. Not Beautycounter, but the beauty industry is always playing catch up, it seems.
Well, it seems like in some ways you're leading the way and not playing catch up. When you were talking about corporate advocacy, it's funny that that term, I feel like, isn't heard very often. Typically, when you think about companies, at least when I think about companies being involved in politics, it's lobbying. And it's lobbying to avoid restrictions. It's lobbying to be able to do things that aren't in the public or in the environment's best interest. And it's behind closed doors and it's not transparent. And so when you're talking about corporate advocacy, which is such a core of Beautycounter, it is transparent and it's raising awareness of things that need to change and things that need to change that will benefit the public good, not the company behind it. And the shareholders behind that company. So I do think that that is a place that Beautycounter is very much leading the way. And hopefully we're seeing more and more companies follow your lead.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We see ourselves as leaders in all of these areas. I think the beauty industry in general, not Beautycounter as a company, like I see us as the one pushing to try to catch up to the food industry or these other product sectors that have really asked harder questions while the beauty industry has kind of been asleep at the wheel. So we definitely see ourselves at the forefront, which sometimes makes you unpopular, which we've just become okay with. But we do like to see that this idea that companies are more vocal in advocating for public health and the environment is becoming more and more popular. And I'm excited by that, and it also makes me nervous. I'm excited by it because I think it's the right thing to do for companies to be using their voice to help influence legislation for a positive benefit rather than protecting the status quo. But the thing I'm worried about is that if consumers expect it, that companies will do it in a way that's not authentic or is feels like it's just a marketing stunt. But I mean, I think consumers are really smart and they can kind of sniff out what's real and where people are kind of rolling up their sleeves and doing the real work versus just paying lip service and kind of talking about it every once in a while, or showing up for a photo shoot.
Absolutely. And I think one of the ways to show that what a company is doing isn't just lip service, is real, is through third-party certifications. And Beautycounter is certified as a B Corp, and a third of the products are EWG verified, which is the leading third-party certification for product safety standards. Can you share what the value of these third-party certifications have brought to the company?
We're really proud to have been a certified B Corporation since we launched in 2013. The B Corp logo has become increasingly important for people because it signals the B Corp certification is so grueling. It's so extensive. It covers everything from how you treat your associates to how you treat your supply chain to do you track and reduce your carbon emissions. It's so comprehensive that having been on the inside of what it takes to get that logo on your product, consumers now know holistically that company is looking out for the greater good. And I think that is incredibly powerful. And in the early days, the B Corp logo was kind of a niche thing that was on some like kind of crunchy brands. That's not the case anymore. Like there are big, major Fortune 500 companies that are seeking certification because they know it's so important to have someone else besides themselves share with the market that what you're doing has been vetted and is accurate. And I think it's incredibly powerful, especially given even myself as someone in this field, I ask a lot of hard questions of companies. You don't really get a peek underneath the hood to see all of the inner workings. So it's good to know that someone else did that. EWG verified is also important because the issue of chemical safety is so wildly complex that even the most kind of trained eye, and even for scientists, it's hard to decipher what is safe and what's not safe. So it's nice to have someone else doing that. We have found that around specifically on the product safety side of things, it's actually so complicated that it's hard for any one seal to kind of have all of the answers. So even EWG themselves can point to flaws in the system of how they get a product verified. But at the end of the day, it's an incredible first step, and it is a visual signal to consumers to say, again, I don't just have to take this brand's word for it because brands can tell me whatever they want. Someone else has been looking carefully at what they do. The one other thing I'll mention, which is less mainstream, it's called the Chemical Footprint Project. So similar to your carbon footprint, where you can figure out your impact on the environment based on what you eat or how you travel, they do chemical footprints for companies. And every year since they launched, we've been submitting where you get a third-party auditor to go, and they do things like verify that our Neverlist is actually real. There's actual ingredients that we ban. And every year we're one of their top ranked companies. And I think that's helpful, again, given the complexity of the science in this space, to have someone else that are academics, not from the brand, really asking hard questions and then telling a consumer, which is publicly available, that we're a top scorer for the Chemical Footprint Project. Because right now, it's too complicated to do on your own. So we need these third-party seals to be legitimate. And the ones in our space, I think, are doing a really good job.
That's great. And I think even circling back to the start of our conversation when we were talking about different terms within the beauty industry that aren't standardized or validated, having these other third-party certifications that do have some sort of validation process behind them is really important.
Absolutely.
Now, the Beautycounter website states that the US only bans 30 ingredients from personal care products. And for context, the EU bans 1,400. And the Food and Drug Administration, the agency that regulates cosmetics in the US, doesn't have the authority to remove harmful ingredients from products we put on our bodies. Why do you think the US has such lax regulations governing materials and ingredients compared to other places?
There are a couple of reasons. I think the majority of Americans, it's changing, but the majority of Americans have assumed that someone out there is making sure their product is safe before it gets to a shelf. It seems totally common sense. So it's so common sense and is so basic. The fact that we don't have these fundamental protections, most people just don't know. Once they learn about the issue, the question is, how can you mobilize those people to then contact their elected officials? Because elected officials today are still primarily hearing about top tier issues. Something like clean beauty is not something that their phones aren't ringing off the hook day in and day out about, unlike healthcare reform or taxes or whatever it may be. So there's been kind of, people think it's already happening. There's a little bit of apathy because people are pretty, and rightfully so, disgruntled with politics in the United States today. But there's also been private interests who have been working through their trade associations to protect the status quo. And it's like, as long as we can push this off and use doubt as a way to create a lot of confusion, specifically doubt through the science of whether or not something is safe or unsafe, it makes it hard for Congress to act when there's this kind of creation of doubt. And this is a history that we have seen repeated over and over again, whether it was the lead industry when we tried to ban lead from gasoline, or the tobacco industry. This is a tried and true technique of confusing and creating questions around the science. Thankfully, the science is increasingly strong every single year. Congress is now waking up. There is bipartisan support for taking action. And I think it takes, I always say there's three things that have to happen in order for a law to get passed. Something as big as what we're talking about, which is reforming the FDA's ability to make sure products are safe. And that's, you need people calling their elected officials. The grassroots have to be mobilized. You have to have it talked about in the press. So even having this conversation with you is a major step in getting us to kind of wake up and take action. And number three, you have to have boots on the ground lobbying. And so all three of those things happening together over time is eventually what gets something across the finish line. And at Beautycounter, we've been at it for 7 years. And I think we're getting really close to hitting that tipping point of passing laws in DC that ultimately will give the FDA the ability to make sure our products are safe.
That's huge. And what is the latest legislation that Beautycounter is supporting?
We're working on 7 different pieces of legislation right now. I'll give you 2 examples. The first of which is the big reform that I just talked about, which is called the Personal Care Product Safety Act. It's currently in the Senate, and it would allow the FDA to be able to say which ingredients are safe or unsafe to use. It would also allow the FDA to be able to recall products on the market that are causing harm. So a great example of that would be hair straightening treatments have 40% formaldehyde, which is a known human carcinogen. And that's a huge risk, not only for people getting their hair straightened, but also for those stylists who are administering these treatments every day. They've been petitioned. The FDA has not been able to recall these products from the market. These reforms would allow them to do so. The second is that we're working on something that's more specific and narrow, but a ban on those forever chemicals, which the acronym is PFAS, perfluorinated and alkyl substances. And so we're advocating to have those toxic chemicals banned from beauty and consumer products. Knowing that Beautycounter is a great example of how you can still create beautiful makeup that lasts all day without using these toxic chemicals. So we're kind of working both on the ingredient side of things and also to create the larger reform that we need to make sure that all families are protected.
That's great. And I want to point out something you mentioned that I wouldn't have considered before, but people working in the salons and their exposure, which is going to be on a daily basis to products that might be really harmful versus an average consumers whose exposure might be a fraction of that. And so the importance to make sure everyone is protected, regardless of how exposed they are to the products they're using.
Yeah, it gets back to the question of it's safe for who. There's a bunch of chatter
Mhm.
right now, like, oh, don't worry about it, beauty products are safe. It's like, well, they're safe for who? When you talk about high use consumers that are, technicians at a nail salon, they're overexposed to highly toxic chemicals they're using every single day. And it gets back to how we define safety at Beautycounter and why it's so important to consider real life exposures, not just something that's fabricated in a computer model, to
Mhm.
help you decide whether or not you're saying yes or no to that ingredient. And it also really gets to, in the state of California specifically, the majority of salon professionals are women, and specifically women of color. And so there's an important environmental justice lens to this work that needs to be considered when you're crafting policies to make sure that all communities are protected.
Mm. And I just really applaud that holistic approach, not just the end consumer, but the salon workers, the people in the supply chain that are mining the ingredients or growing the ingredients, but looking at really all of the different stakeholders in the process and around the process and seeing what their exposure level is and what's safe and what's not.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to do, but we think as a brand built on safety, it's important to us to make sure that we're thinking about safety from the widest definition possible.
Absolutely. Now we're running towards the end of our conversation, and I wonder if there's anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to share.
I think I think the final thing I want to share is just that even in today's world where we have a hyper divided, hyper partisan Congress, phone calls and emails still matter. I am still every day, I'm blown away by the power of someone going to the contact form on your senator's website. Like, you think no one's ever going to read that contact form. It's on an antiquated website. It's not slick. You fill out your name and your address and you speak your piece and you hit send. There are staff that are employed every single day on taxpayers' dimes to read those emails, tally them, and report to the senator what people are writing in about. So whether it's the power of someone's voice to change laws or the power of someone's voice to change the way a company behaves, if you send an email to a company and ask them hard questions and they never respond, you still had an impact, because trust me, someone on the receiving end read that and circulated it internally. And the more people that do it, the more we're all forced to change. And change is hard and it's murky, but I am completely, people are like, how can you do this? The stuff you do takes so long, like 10 years to pass a law. It's because I'm incredibly energized by just the power that one person can have by asking a hard question or sending that email. And never forget that that is why and how our democracy was built, around this notion that individuals have voices. And even with all the problems with politics today, I'm consistently excited, and I just feel full every single day seeing how much that transforms our laws and how much it transforms the marketplace.
I love that so much. And just want to give a call to action to those listening of, if you want safer standards within the products you're bringing into your house that you're putting on your body, ask for them, ask for stricter regulations, and do exactly what Lindsay is saying. Go to your representative and ask that there be more regulations in place.
Absolutely, it works.
Now, where can people find out more about the work you're doing, the advocacy you're doing, and Beautycounter?
If you head to beautycounter.com, under our story, we have pages dedicated to everything from our advocacy work, all the wins we've had over the years, our responsible sourcing programs, how we define what safe is. We have a lot of really good content. And I would also encourage you to check out the Mica page, beautycounter.com/Mica. On our website, we have a short 10-minute documentary that walks through the story of our journey towards responsibly sourced mica. And I think it's definitely worth a watch.
Fantastic. And I'll include links to all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for such a great conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me and for sharing our story. It's been really fun.